First of all, happy Valentine's Day. I don't know how many of you out there celebrate this holiday. Uh, and I know some people like to get together and watch romantic comedies or other romantic movies. I had a few movies that I'd watched that I thought might be a good pick for this video. But I realized there was something else I saw recently that I thought it's an unorthodox pick, but I felt like now's as good a time as any to talk about Nickel Boys. Let's get into it. If you know anything about this movie, obviously it's probably not the happiest thing to talk about on a day that is geared around highlighting love. Now, we're conditioned to think about Valentine's Day in the romantic sense of love. But as we all know, love is an expansive concept. It's an expansive feeling that doesn't just encompass the romantic partner or the romantic object of affection or whatever it is. And I think it's that expansive idea of love that when I thought more about it, it felt like, oh, why couldn't this be a good movie to talk about for Valentine's Day? It essentially deals with two young black men, and their dynamic, living and sorting out life in the Jim Crow era in the United States, the 1960s. And it's an experience. So I'll say off the top, I knew very little about Nickel Boys. This is one of the movies that I was mildly curious about. It wasn't something I was dying to see, but it was on my list of things to watch at some point. I had a feeling about it just because I knew it was a period piece. And sometimes that comes with a certain expectation when you're dealing with black characters in a period piece. And you know what I mean by that. If you don't personally, so I'll say this: I didn't know much going into this movie, but my expectation, my feeling, was that it was going to deal with, some kind of struggle for black people in a sort of time capsule situation. And having seen the movie now, I'm not wrong. I wasn't wrong about that, but. And I could say that the approach was inspired, actually. I wouldn't have thought to see it depicted in the way that we got it. I discovered after I'd seen the movies that this is based on the book from 2019, written by Colson Whitehead. It's an award-winning book. And it depicts, it's a fictional version of a reform school in Florida that in real life had a more than a century existence. And this reform school was guilty of some pretty atrocious crimes, everything from abuse to sexual assault to outright murder to some of these young men. And only was barely closed, I think, probably 2011 or something like that. It was fairly recent. It was shut down, and as a result of all the investigations and things that had been opened up about the school's practices and things of that nature. So it's quite, just that on its own is quite surprising that something was allowed to survive that long. Post Jim Crow, well into in the middle of the sort of Obama administration type situation where it's like this wild, weird Twilight Zone-y type situation. It's so interesting. Like on one hand, it's like you could say, oh, this is just like any other film dealing with the struggles of black people in the 1960s and stuff. But I think you find when you look closely at it, it's different. It's not the same. And I think one of the things that makes it different is the fact that it's depicted in the first person. So immediately it feels alive. It feels active. It feels present in a way that it doesn't always in period pieces like this. And I think personally, I can speak for myself. My experience as a Black person have been similar to just in spirit and in outright some cases pretty direct ways. So to me, it felt very, oh, this is, I know this experience. I've seen some version of this. I've lived this. And in a time when it was, in California, liberal, California, whatever it is, even in California, where you're supposed to be sort of quote free from this kind of stuff. You're not immune to different experiences of racism, and so it was something that felt very potent for me. And I appreciated that. Though. I appreciated how it was not sugarcoated. I understand. There's a school of thought that says there's no place for movies like this that feel like they're like torture porn, or like there are movies like, you hear the same thing about movies dealing with the slave trade and how this is just slavery porn. We don't want to hear any more stories about that. And I think there's something to that. I don't think that argument should be discounted. However, personally, I feel like if you're going to make a movie about struggles like this, I think it's important. There's something really powerful about it not being sugarcoated. If you're going to give it straight. Give us the truth. I want the truth about what it is, so it can be not that we need all these reminders, but it helps to see, it puts things into perspective in a way that as a reminder, like, okay, well, things are markedly better than they were in the 1960s. That said, it doesn't mean that there aren't echoes of this. And I think that for me, it was important to see that the first person aspect of what was important, just from an experience standpoint, like experiencing this movie through the first person puts the audience right in the center of what's happening. You feel everything, and it's as close to. It reminded me of Moonlight. You've seen Barry Jenkins' Moonlight. There are sequences in that movie that put the viewer in the body and the mindset of the main character. And I think because this movie is mostly like that, the whole movie is first person. Whether you're in Elwood's perspective or Turner's perspective, you're right there. And that's pretty cool. Speaking of the first person angle, I think that's also one of the things that made the cinematography so engaging. The movie should be recognized for cinematography, because for what it does in giving us a limited scope, it does quite a bit for how the film is depicted. The fact that it's first person is one thing, but the way that the camera is able to interact like a head, turning, leaning, laying down, doing different things. I suspect a lot of that had to be choreographed. It had to, they had to have planned out some of those shots to make them seem as flawless as they do, because it really works. Going back to the love story element in this film, I think the relationship between Elwood and Turner is really well drawn out. It's not often. I think we see more of it now, but I think it's just so, because we don't see it as frequently as we see stories that deal with the more conventional romantic heterosexual relationships. It's a treat to have a story about genuine friendship being established. You can imagine just the amount of struggle that these two characters go through and how the relationship is forged through that struggle. And you hope, you want the best for them. You really want them to have a really rich, long, dynamic, long time of knowing each other. And I just think it's both actors do a tremendous job. I think Ethan Harris and Brandon Wilson as Elwood and Turner, respectively, they both do a tremendous job. They feel so natural, so authentic. Nothing feels forced or fake about the performances. And I like that the film takes time to put us into this perspective of both of these young men. And we learn about each of them quite literally through their perspective. And so when they come together, everything just feels that much richer. It's an inspired choice, because you could have told this story in the traditional sense, how most films of this time period are told. And but I think the fact that, again, it's much more intimate. The first person view makes it more intimate for us, and therefore we see that there's much more closeness between the two of them, and there's an intimacy there that is, and we find that it's actually, whatever the intimacy that's on screen there, we find that it's actually much deeper the further we go into the film. And I think it's beautiful. It's just very well done. Speaking of intimacy and richness, Anjanou Ellis-Taylor is fantastic. I haven't seen her in too much. This is one of the roles that she reminded me a lot of. I think Naomi Harris, again, going back to Moonlight, a character who's not in the movie a lot, but makes an impression. She felt so familiar to me. Like she felt like an aunt, a grandparent, someone from my church family, someone from, growing up, my church family, the different churches I went to, some of the old Black women who had this warmth about them that took care of everybody's kids. And it was such a treat. She was so, again, she had such heart. She played the role of Elwood's grandmother with such just almost like, and there was a music to how she spoke. It was almost like she was singing, like a comfortable, like a hymn. Like she was living in a time during a tremendous distress and hardship. And she found spaces to sing still. Her dialogue was like singing, like a song. And there was something so comforting about that, even in the midst of all the challenging stuff that was happening all around in the film. Anjanou Ellis-Taylor is a standout in this movie. She might be probably the standout in this movie. I can't think of anyone else who stands out as much. So, something to think about there. It's so funny that Moonlight comes to this. We're talking about love and things. Moonlight obviously is very directly a more is also a love story in some ways. While that focuses more on the story between the two male leads in this film, I think to some extent Mahershala Ali's character and our main character, there's a love story there too. Again, he's another character who's not around a lot, but he makes a major impression. I think similarly, this film is like that. You have Elwood and Turner. Their dynamic makes the sort of is the through line that we're following in this movie. But really, Elwood's grandmother is like the anchor of this film. She pops up in at very pointed parts of this movie. And I think that is also an element of the love story. She loves Elwood so much. You can feel that in how she moves, how she speaks to him. And there's a scene where she speaks to Turner, and the love is there too. She goes to visit Elwood at the reform school, and she's not allowed to see him, but she sees Turner instead. And then they have a conversation. The love there is it's so palpable. You feel it coming off the screen almost. It's just she was amazing. Yeah, revelation. She was a revelation. So look, at the end of the day, look, this is not an easy movie to watch. I think, but I think you'll see that from a more technical perspective, there's a lot to appreciate. For a film head, there's a lot to appreciate there from how things were shot. The aspect ratio is cool. I noticed that immediately. The aspect ratio is like a 4:3. It's not a widescreen. It's like old 1930s, 1920s, 1930s films before they did before Panavision, before they started doing more widescreen stuff. And again, that's perfect for a vehicle for the story because it's tunnel vision almost. It's like how we see stuff is less expansive from our perspective. So it's really cool in that way. But from a more thematic and narrative perspective, it might be a harder watch, but still a lighter watch than something that's like a slave movie. It's not as heavy as some of those movies can be, and yet it has its own heaviness. But if you're looking for something good, consider checking out Nigga Boys. It's a good movie. It's got good acting and really cool. I think the visuals are really cool. Camera stuff. The shots are really nice. Yeah, it's a good movie. And I think I'm going to leave it there for now. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. And come on back because there's, got more to talk about. I really appreciate your time. And see you in the next video.